My name is Tom Pankratz. I'm a former director of the IDA and the editor of the Water Desalination Report. The IDA is a technical trade organization with a goal of encouraging research, development, and the appropriate utilization of desalination and water reuse technologies. Today's IDA represents the coming together of two organizations in the 1980s, the International Desalination and Environmental Association and the National Water Supply and Improvement Association. Today we're in San Diego at the IDA's biannual World Congress, where we're going to be interviewing some desal industry veterans. This is part of a program funded by Faith Leitner in honor of her late father, Gordon Leitner, an industry veteran and a mentor to many of us. Gordon was a former IDA president and the founding editor of the organization's Desal and Water Reuse Quarterly. Today we're going to be talking with three veteran desalters. On my immediate left is Miriam Balaban. Sitting next to her is Dr. Adel Bushnak and Dr. Jim Birkett. So we'd like to start the discussion by first asking each of you a little bit about what got you involved in desalination. What was your first role in desalination? And tell us just briefly a little bit about your career. Miriam.
Well, I studied chemistry at the University of Pennsylvania, and then I got into, I applied this chemistry as an editor, a scientific editor, and was already involved in the field of editing, and somebody said, there's no journal for desalination. Oh, I said, I'll make one. And I wrote to Elsevier also to ask them if they would be the publisher. Today I would be my own publisher, but anyway, I wrote to them, they agreed, and we got together a board, and that's how I started desalination.
And what year was that?
That was in ’65.
So
and
50 years ago.
Yeah, 50 years ago. In fact, the Chinese just celebrated it. And it became a very important part of my life. It was very interesting. Now, this followed also the meeting in Washington. There was a big international meeting in Washington on desalination. I have these proceedings. And this journal, Desalination Journal, then first appeared in '66, in January '66. And from then on, it grew. There was one volume a year, then to 16 and more nowadays. And then I started another journal because it had to expand to water treatment. I felt that there were more articles, more people, more countries. So this is how I first got into it. I also attended the conference in '67, and there.
Which conference was that?
It was the Delyanis conference, the Freshwater from the Sea, and there was a series of 8 conferences headed by, I think 7 or 8, by Professor Anthony Delyanis from Greece. He had started this series, or that is the Federation, the European Federation of Chemical Engineering, working party on freshwater from the sea in '62 in Athens, Greece. But then in '67 was this first larger conference. And that's where I met Robert Silver, a pioneer of thermal, and Sidney Loeb of reverse osmosis. And that was a very important point in getting involved and being able to gather the papers and publish them in the journal.
And that wasn't your only job in desal. I mean, you've been involved with the European Desalination Society for a long time as well.
The way that started was, indeed, from this European Federation of Chemical Engineering, working party on freshwater from the sea. They had one member from each European country, just one person, sometimes 2 if it was a bigger, especially from Germany, France, and England, where the Institutes of Chemical Engineering were also collaborated with the German one. And but it didn't have a personal membership. And but I was involved as guest member also from the '80s, I believe it was. And yes, from the '80s. And Robert Silver was another guest member. And the others were appointed from each country. Now, in '93, we decided that we had to have individual members, and we founded the European Desalination Society, which was open to individuals or to corporate members. Also, there was another little event in between where the International Desalination Association, which was first founded in '73 as IDEA by Robert Bakish, International Desalination and Environment Association. But then, so they started an affiliate, a European affiliate, but then we decided it's one Europe, so the European affiliate and the Working Party on Freshwater from the Sea turned into EDS, European Desalination Association, first met at Elsevier in '93.
And it goes without saying, you're still active. I see you at more conferences than I think any other single person around the world. Thanks for that. Dr. Bushnak, what got you into this industry?
Because I believe water is a very basic necessity of life. I was teaching transportation engineering in King Saud University in Riyadh. Then my brother started Al Kawthar company, the first water production, design, construction of seawater RO plants. But this is back 1978. So I have not resigned from the first year, but after 2 or 3 years, I resigned from university to be full-time.
You wanted to wait and see if it would be successful.
Yeah, I really wanted to go back to the university, but it was difficult to go back after 2 years. So I resigned and became full-time businessman. Al Kawthar, the first company I co-founded, but then I resigned from Al Kawthar because I wanted to start manufacturing membrane. DuPont in the 70s declined to be our partner in Saudi Arabia to give us the technology of Permacep. But in early 80s, they came back and changed 180 degrees and said, we want to manufacture Permacep in Jeddah. So that was my second project. Unfortunately, the chairman of DuPont changed, so they decided to withdraw from Permacep altogether. So my Saudi partner decided also to stop the project. So I became just a consulting engineer in engineering, helping other companies to design, build desalination plants. After learning how to do it in such conferences here, IDA congresses, really because I was teaching something else and I had to learn desalination in conferences. And of course I learned from Jack Luce, who was here in San Diego, and we had Al Kawthar USA for a couple of years. Then in the 90s I was more busy with using seawater directly for agriculture, because also I am keenly interested how to increase food production using seawater or sustainable sources of water. And then in the 90s, the Saudi government told the industries, we cannot give you more water. The priority is available water has to go to municipal demand growing. So many businessmen from the industry came to me and said, let us form a company to produce or desalt water. So we got the permit for the first private-owned desalination plant in Saudi Arabia. This is in 90s. So we started Kindasa, condensing plant, whatever, it's the name familiar in Jeddah. But really, Kindasa now has so many seawater RO plants. And 7, 8 years ago, Gulf Bank came to me and said, we want to establish an international company, not just because Kindasa is just operating in Jeddah. So we established Moya holding company in Bahrain and invested in Moya Bushnak, which now we have many plants we are operating in, because we sell water. Basically, we are not a contractor, but we investor. And we put the other 50% in Singapore. We bought a public share company, Moya Asia. And so now Moya Holding, of course, even is worth as much as Kindasa. But Kindasa, of course, because it's older, it has more assets. And we are producing a good amount of water to supply private business consumers by pipeline, by trucks.
Now, you were president of the IDA, or very active in the
Yes.
IDA board for many years.
Yes.
When was that you were president?
This is in the 80s, early 80s. I was happy to work with Jim to establish, several of us working, because also I like to share knowledge and share the benefit with as many people as possible. So I think that's why IDA was a very good tool, and we worked together how to this transition from IDEA to IDA. And then when I was the president, the big challenge was how to integrate the office in UK with the office in Boston. And we went through that experience. Anyway, I am happy to see IDA growing, and happy to see Saline Water Conversion Corporation and other Saudi companies actively supporting conventions, which certainly.
Now, just one thing, a little bit off of that subject, but you said Kindasa, and Kindasa is an interesting word. I mean,
Yes.
tell the people, or can you explain?
The first desal plant built in Saudi Arabia, it was not even Saudi Arabia at that time, 1908, but Jeddah is short of potable water. So the Ottoman Empire came and built this basically condensing plant thermal system. Instead of ship, they put it on the ground to produce water for people to drink. And they used Kindasa as a closest to condensing plant. And this is why my neighbors, when 30 years ago, they came to me and suggested, let us use the same word, my partners in Kindasa, and I agreed. So it's more to revive the old tradition or name of Kindasa in Jeddah, so basically.
Okay, good. Thanks. Jim, you're known as the resident historian in the desal industry, and you've been a part of most of it, and were actually the first president of the IDA,
True.
as I understand. You also, when I was thinking about how to introduce you, I thought, well, he was a former consultant with Arthur D. Little. Most desalters, including myself, don't have a real working knowledge of what role Little played. Tell us a little bit about it and your background.
Oh, yeah, it's all a matter of a bunch of happy accidents occurring. This is not career planning at all. I emerged from university as a physical chemist, thinking I might go into academia, because that's the only work I'd ever actually seen chemists doing, was at university. But I had an accident by chance. I had by chance an interview with the firm Arthur D. Little Incorporated of Cambridge, Massachusetts, which was an independent consulting firm founded in, I think, 1895 or thereabouts. So I took a job with ADL, thinking that it would be just a temporary thing until something better came along. And I found myself sort of on a track to become an electrochemist. I was with the electrochemistry group, which worked on corrosion, electroplating, batteries, fuel cells, things like that, the interface between an electrolytic solution and a metal surface. I joined Little's in 62, and then in 66 we got a job, the company got a job with the Office of Saline Water to look at corrosion and materials problems in multi-stage flash plants. So the firm looked around for an available electrochemist, and I was in the right group at the right time. So they said, Jim, would you like to look at corrosion in desalination plants? Well, of course, I'd never seen one desalination plant, but I said, this is great, let's do it. And it sort of built on that. We had a series of projects making field surveys of corrosion in desal plants, which we got into a little bit of a spreading of our assignment. Became not just heat exchange tubes and tube plates, but corrosion in all parts of the plant, and then in operating problems in the plant. And it even got into energy consumption in the plant, and then it spread further. Well, you shouldn't just be doing these problems in MSF plants. We should be looking at ME and electrodialysis. There was no RO at the time. So the small team of us, 2 or 3 of us, had a chance to visit all of these plants in the late 60s all over the world with the different technologies, and that just got me hooked. I just thought this was a great place. That the challenge is important. The potential for good is important. The people are really great. I mean, you meet some fine people in this line of work. So that's how I got in, and then mission creep crept in, and companies came to us and said, well, how do people make purchase decisions in the desalination area? What is the customer looking for? Or they'd come and say, here's this wonderful new invention. Does this invention really have any legs to it? We had the advantage over many consulting firms that we had labs and shops. And we could go in and we could build stuff. I could go into the lab across my office and burn holes in my shirt. This is the great sort of hands-on thing. We played the hands-on with the theoretical and with the business aspects of it. This went on through the 70s and 80s. I left in 88, but in 77, the old NWSIA, one of the predecessors of IDA, was having a conference here in San Diego out at the Del Coronado Hotel. That was in 77. That was 48 years ago. No, 38 years ago, whatever it was. And I came out and I met these people, and I'd never met quite these people before. These weren't just plant operators. They're researchers, and they were suppliers of equipment, suppliers of materials. And I just got hooked on the association thing and the chance to learn a lot and meet a lot of people. I became, as time went on, a director of WISIA, and also at the time of the merger with IDEA, I was also a director of IDEA. So just these concurrent events, I became sort of the first president of IDA, held a job for 2 years, then passed it along to Adil here, and the rest is history.
Well, since then, what have you done? Just in a nutshell.
Yeah, when I left ADL, a lot of the work I was doing was for commercial clients, company confidential. I'd come to these conferences and people would say, well, what do you do for a living? And I'd say, well, I don't want to talk about that. So I think they thought I worked for the CIA or something. I don't know. But I left ADL under good terms in '88. And from then until the present time, I've been working under my own flag as an independent one-shop consultancy called Westneck Strategies. I'm now fully retired. I'm no longer doing that sort of thing for money. But while I was doing it, I was evaluating technologies, looking at merger, acquisition opportunities, due diligence, stuff like that. Heavily involved I was heavily involved at one point in gas separation membranes, and was involved in the acquisition of Permia from Monsanto by Air Products. I thought that I might have quit desal completely and gone into gas separation membranes because they were so fascinating, and the technology was a close cousin. But I really ended up staying in desal, and I'm glad I did.
Good. Well, and I know that even though you're retired, I know that you still have a passion for it. You still stay current on what's going on. Yeah. So.
I subscribe to your rag.
Miriam, I'd like to go back to some of the people that you've met in your 50 years. I see the papers you've got laid out there, and I know that one person you've already mentioned is Professor Silver from Scotland, yes, who was one of the real pioneers, who has one of the first patents on the MSF technology, and was the guiding influence to Weir Westgarth. You told me that he used to sing to you on the telephone.
Yes, well, we became good friends, and we started in '67. He took me out to dinner in the conference, and he made sure to educate me. Scotland is Scotland, and James the Sixth of Scotland became James the First of England, but you should know that Scotland is Scotland. Ever since then, I always, when I published a paper from Scotland, I did not put UK after it, because I had been instructed that Scotland is Scotland. That was by Robert Silver. And we stayed good friends until the very end. And then he used to sing to me. He wrote poetry also. He also was a literary person. And he wrote poetry. He even sent me some of the notes, actually, to a song he had written to his wife. I still have these, and some of his poems. But also then he would sing to me on the phone. And from the Isle of Mull, where he moved afterwards.
Yeah.
So,
well, and another friend of yours, who in fact you gave a eulogy at his funeral, was Sidney Loeb, who co-inventor of the RO membrane.
membrane, yeah.
And in fact, he entrusted his papers to you for archiving and for handling. So tell us a little bit about what should we know about Sid Loeb
Sidney
personally?
Loeb, first of all, was a very modest person. Very modest. He never made a penny from all this RO that became the prominent process. And he was also a very friendly, kind, and entertaining person. And I think this is something that about his personality, modest as anything, and yet fun to be with. I have some pictures here as well, and also in his papers, he left me all his papers, everything. There are letters, there are notes, and he used to scribble on his own papers, which makes it difficult to republish now. So we did some OCR, optical character readings, so that we could have them clean. Also, they were typed. Wait, the first ones were the California, the UCLA reports, and they were typed rather poorly. Well, for today, I mean, it was fine for that day. But he would also scribble over them. He always corrected himself or updated himself, and that's in this notes. And he had many letters. He did not publish, actually, papers, as many papers, which lends itself to a collection of reprints. So this is one of the things about his papers, but they're really personal, interesting, and always giving credit to the other person. If he got any very small money from the first patent he had, he contributed, or that is, he distributed it among his assistants, anybody who had worked with him. And he was thrilled with the Coalinga plant, which first produced water.
1966.
Yes. Yeah. But he would have this plaque in his room. He had a plaque, and he would carry it around if there was any kind of a meeting where they discussed his invention, his work, even a popular meeting. He would take this plaque with him, and he was very proud of it. And that was the plaque on the plant in Coalinga. And Coalinga really is Coaling Station A. that was called Coalinga.
Yeah, and that, just for the people who don't know that, it's a little city in California that's southwest of Sacramento.
Right.
So, and it was the first commercial RO plant.
Right.
I think 5,000 gallons a day. But
and he was close with Bob Riley, who is still alive right here in San Diego.
And still active, still doing research for the Bureau of Reclamation. That's there's another person that I wanted to ask you about, and it's someone who a lot of people don't know, and that's your good friend Ora Kedem.
Ora, yes.
She's an amazing person, and
yes.
She's one of those people who's one of the smartest, most influential people that we have never heard of. So tell us a little bit about her.
Well, Ora was a chemist at the Weizmann Institute, studied chemistry. She was very gifted, very successful in her work academically, and she went into desalination. She also established a membrane department at the Weizmann Institute, and which was very good. They didn't continue with desalination there, but she did, and then she went to Ben Gurion University, in the South, and she established a group there which to this day is active in desalination. And it's called actually the Desalination and Water Treatment Department Institute. And she led that for years. You know, she retired a few times, as she always says, from the Weizmann Institute, then from Ben Gurion University, but then again she was called back and retired again. I speak to her rather frequently. She's fine. She's not really working, but she's very much in, and she keeps in the field.
Yeah, I know she keeps in. She keeps up on the industry too. Once it gets in your blood, it's
yes. And she meets some of the young fellows from the university and so on.
Dr. Bushnak, one thing that I always recall from hearing you introduced at conferences around the world is that you were an advisor to the king, I guess. Should I assume they meant it literally? I mean, what was your role as far as advising the Saudi government on desalination?
Well, I was advisor more on education than desalination.
Okay.
The only time, well, twice I met the King Abdullah, most actively interacting with him. Once we celebrated the opening of the first private-owned woman college, which became a university now, in Jeddah. And he was attending the opening. So he recognized me because he saw me first in Supreme Economic Council, which I was a member of the advisory board of the Supreme Economic Council. But after several years in that council, I decided to resign because it's not worth traveling from Jeddah to Riyadh, because we will not meet with the king, you know, and just another government committee and so on. Bureaucratic thing. I felt really no, okay, but really I'm still active with the government in education, and in fact I am working hard this year and next year to set up a foundation which sign a contract with the Ministry of Education to build the first well, it's private, it's not government, but it will work with the government to build all kind of schools at all levels, from kindergarten to high school, and girls and boys, of course, separately, but with international level acceptance. So it's not local school. Okay, this is should be for the gifted, for the people who can really how to be future leaders and entrepreneurs. So hopefully in 2 months the governor of Medina will put the cornerstone or the first step to get that big project. It's ambitious because it's public-private, futuristic education project. And I agreed to move forward because we are celebrating also in a few months 75 years of the first high school in Saudi Arabia, which my father established 75 years ago. So I didn't want just to talk about the past, I want to talk about the future. So this is what I'm working on now, more than water, is really education.
Good. I think that's admirable. And you've, as far as speaking about education, you've got some sons that are following in your footsteps.
Yes, both my boy and girl, son and daughter, are working in education.
Good. And what about the water business? You have some family members that... My nephew, he is, I'm glad the new generation cover all areas of interest. Good. And Jim, as I said when I first introduced you, you're the industry's historian. I mean, between you and Miriam, we've got the whole thing covered just about. But tell us a little bit about why the interest in the history, and
Well, you see, I can no longer keep up to date with what's happening currently, so I have to take refuge in the past, where I at least have a half a chance of understanding it. No, it's just fascinating, and so many people do not understand that desalination has a present. They think that desalination is something still in the future. They won't recognize that it has a current presence, let alone the fact that it has a past that goes back hundreds and thousands of years. And you can find documents of strange and wonderful attempts. I mean, so ever since the first primitive man knelt down beside the primitive sea and tried to drink it, he has carried in his mind the thought that there's got to be a better way. And we're still working on it. It's just fascinating that the first patent dispute, the first, dispute over patents in desalination occurred in the 1680s. Lord, that's a long time ago, and yet people were beating each other over the head with patent documents, even then, when their equipment was really pretty primitive. There's the slow development of finally the development of the multi-effect system in the mid-1800s, when all of a sudden you could double or triple the quantity of water you could get for the same amount of fuel. I mean, suddenly the economics of desalination changed drastically, and it's just been building from there. And so there's so many little nuggets stuck out there.
If I were to ask you what is the most interesting nugget of information you found out in your research you've done on desal's history, is there anything that comes to mind?
Perhaps the one I personally get the most kick out of was in about 1990, a former colleague at Arthur D. Little sent me a couple newspaper clippings from the Miami Herald. And the newspaper clippings referred to the rehabbing of Fort Zachary Taylor on Key West, and in digging around in some piles of rubble, they had unearthed a primitive desalination plant, which had a name tag on it, Normandy's Patent Marine Aerated Freshwater Company, unit number 189. Well, this was out of the blue, unscheduled, so I had a little bit of discretionary money in my business account, so I flew down to the University of Florida in Gainesville, where they, at that time, had this relic. And I also went to Fort Zachary Taylor in Key West, where they'd found it, and I talked to the people who'd found it and the people who were trying to restore it, and I have photographs of it, which you have seen. And that was just a wonderful bolt from the blue that I could touch this piece of equipment, which was the first piece of operating equipment in the United States, to our knowledge. You're 150 years old. I've since then pursued the company and the founder, Dr. Alphonse Normandy, in great details, and generated a few papers, and discovered that in fact this unit, 150 years old, was actually a two-effect unit. It was the first multi-effect desal unit anywhere in the world, and I'd actually touched it and seen it. It's little things like this make your day. I guess that was the thing I get the most kick out of, was having accidentally stumbled on that damn thing.
Miriam, are there any other people that we should know about, or people that you've come across that are important to desal's history, or you think were important to the industry?
Well, I go back to the first plant that I learned about or published in the first issue of desalination. That was Ali al-Saya, an Egyptian who built in Kuwait, and I thought he was very interesting.
Do you have any idea how many papers that you're responsible for publishing?
Yes, about 15,000.
15.
And maybe saw twice as many. A lot were rejected. Also, I covered the conferences, and I think that we have a good record. I have a list here of the conferences, the proceedings, and they were really refereed papers within the conferences. And I covered all these, and I think that's a good record. People look down on proceedings sometimes, not anymore, I believe, because these are really, they express a record.
Well, how has the impact of the PowerPoint changed the...
No, I don't think it has, because one is the PowerPoint presentation, the other is the paper. So that even when there are PowerPoints, we don't even collect them. We do collect the manuscripts, but they are just manuscripts. They are not refereed papers. Even when they're selected, we select according to, I think all of us select according to abstracts, but it does not mean that's a paper to be published. And then after, I used to do this even before a conference, that was standing on my head, but now what we do is we do have the papers, ask everybody if they have any revisions, and after the conference do the reviewing and selection and publication. So that, but I think these express a good record now that we have many years, 50 years of this information. That I think they're a good record of what happened. In fact, another thing, I sometimes look back. Let's say we're talking about forward osmosis, and this is a relatively new field, and but it's not that new. When I look back in 1976, there were some papers by Chuck Moody, and I understand that he was also monitored by Bob Riley. Mm-hmm. And that Bob Riley also commercialized Sid Loeb's membrane. But in the journal, we have papers that way back that today might be considered new. There certainly.
Yeah, some of these technologies that we're reevaluating are 30 and 40 years old.
Yeah.
And sometimes you wonder why we just didn't let them die a natural death. But then again, with technology, we're also finding new applications.
Yeah. Revived and maybe perfected and new applications.
Adel, I want to go back to another project that is interesting to me that you played a role in kind of after the fact, and that is we're in the middle of a drought here in California, and one of the things they're doing is scrambling to find alternative water supplies. And whenever there's a discussion about the drought, we always go back to Santa Barbara. Yeah, but you built the plant in Santa Barbara, and the day it started up, it started to rain and you mothballed the plant. Well, in Saudi Arabia, you recognized that this was occurring, and when the plant was, I think 92 is when it was shut down, but they decided to sell off part of it in 99. You actually, or as I understand it, you bought part of the plant.
50%.
Tell us a little bit about how did you find out about the plant, what prompted you to buy it and transport it to Saudi?
Yes, thank you. This is the project Hindasa because we are in urgent need to buy ready rather than wait a year, and also in a containerized, which Santa Barbara plants. So we bought, they can only sell us 50%, they were not willing to sell 100%. And of course, they are still in operation, that we upgraded it to make it more efficient, and I'll be happy to help Santa Barbara how to improve their 50% containers. It's still in operation, it's still in production.
How did you hear about? I mean, did you contact them or?
One of our member of the board in Hindasa was familiar. Or in relation, I don't know how, he arranged for me to come here and visit Santa Barbara, inspect, and we signed, and it was just short, didn't take very long, because they were ready, and we were ready to buy, and they were ready to sell.
And as you said, I talked to one of your operators, one of your people who's over at this conference in the conference that preceded the IDA here for the past couple of days, and we talked about it, and he said they're just now changing the energy recovery devices.
Yes.
Because since 95 or 2005, I guess, they've been making their own parts because that particular turbine is no longer available.
Yes.
But he said they finally decided to go in and replace them. So it's that plant that they're in the process of rehabilitating here has been running continuously over in Saudi. So I think it's interesting.
Interesting. And if you allow me, give me 1 minute just to suggest for the young generation or for the future now, really, what we need. I think whatever we are using, I'm happy Saudi Arabia or Saline Water Conversion Corporation convinced now that seawater RO is better and the best technology available. It took them many years to be convinced. But more about talking about the worldwide and the future to help this integration or answering questions like you asked about Santa Barbara. We should have a desalination portal. It's not just a website. It should be a portal to connect people, more operators than inventors. And today there are portals but really it is not helpful to operators in the field because experience, desal is still field technology, if you like, more than science or equally as much as science. I mean, seawater RO developed a lot by experience and solving problems. In the future, we need this connection and communication, and internet is the best communication system. So I am still working, and I met with Christopher Gasson yesterday to encourage him to start, and I discussed this with IDA board, but they have other priorities. Hopefully, my dream is to see this international portal in many languages, because you cannot communicate just in English. You have to be able to communicate in the local language to increase the local benefits. So even if Global Water Intelligence on IDA agreed and started the English version, I promise to help with the Arabic version. I'm sure we can find others to help in different languages. And that will connect experts and operators together. Oh, I have this problem. What is the best solution? Who has the best solution? It's very difficult now unless you come to such conferences, and not everybody can afford to come and find the right person to answer the question. So the International Desal Portal, I call it, whatever the name, but I hope IDA will be involved in it, as well as all affiliates, because we need local languages, translations, and contributions. Ideas do not come from a board or a single group or company. More and more in the future, we should work like a mankind brain, you know. And the internet will allow that connection.
You wanted to add something to that?
Yeah, well, I should mention also Desline in this direction. That in '77 I started the website, www.desline.com, and we have a few thousand visits every day with maybe 10,000 hits, and people are looking at it. And now mostly it has events, it has people, 35,000, that is about 5,000 companies, organizations, and over 30,000 individuals. Mm-hmm. So there is the connection there, and we add, different sites. I mean, different job opportunities, job seekers, and any information can be added to this. And we do this. I mean, just sporadically, not an organized education system, but that reaching out. At least that's what we're doing, and I think it should be, as you say, extended to other things. But the mechanism, at least mechanism that I have, I started it, like a friend of mine said, because you had to put your addresses into order when the internet came along, and the addresses from the journal and from the conferences and so on. And I think this also was the objective of reaching out and connecting. But of course, it should have more information of the kind that you mentioned.
Good. Jim, I want to go back to technology with you for a minute. You've been watching forward osmosis, I mentioned a little earlier, and pressure retarded osmosis, membrane distillation. What is your assessment of the technologies and why they haven't taken off sooner? I mean, technologies have been looked at on and off for the last, in some cases, 40 years. You have any comments on them, or is there anything that you see that you're really are excited about?
Well, you're right about the 40 years. Certainly, some of these have been around a long time, and you would have thought that if they really had strengths, they would have been exploited by now. I think in the case of membrane distillation, most of the research has been done looking at the membrane. But I don't believe the limiting factor in membrane distillation is the membrane. I think it's an understanding of the thermal side of the equation. There are limits on how far you can go in terms of either gained output ratio or percent recovery. And these limits are determined by very simple equations which were first developed by Bob Tidball at Envirogenics. If you run the usual numbers, they come out with a product which undeniably works, but it's hard to see it as being commercially successful because it does not meet certain standards for a successful product. So I tend to be down on membrane distillation unless it can be made to operate in a true multi-effect mode, which there are pilots going to this effect, but we haven't seen a commercial installation. In terms,
let me just switch to Adel for a minute, because you've been here for the past couple of days and heard a number of papers on membrane distillation. Do you have any comments to what Jim's just said?
I am maybe optimistic. I hope so. In the future, in the near future, we will see seawater or the brine and the water salinity difference as a source of energy to reduce consumption of desalination, power consumption. But in this regard, I like to think outside the box, because thinking in membrane, RO or BRO or FO, to me this is a box. Outside the box is how we can, the future will be much more difficult, and we cannot afford to continue business as usual as we are today. So I am pushing and encouraging now how, especially the young generation, think outside the box of just water or desalination or membrane. We have to find the best solution to produce more water, more food, more energy, anywhere, anytime, at minimum cost, with minimum environmental impact and sustainable financially, administratively, and so on. Now, unfortunately, I could not see, I did not find anybody thinking, and usually people think of water and food or water and energy, including myself, which in the past 20 years. Now I started thinking of this nexus and how we get outside the box and encourage major innovations, not incremental, to change. I hope I am working now to support the technology which can achieve this sustainability local, anywhere in the world. Water, food, energy, the same technology. Okay? So it's not impossible, it is possible. And I did not register it or because I don't want to get into legal problems.
No, that's a good point. And Jim, my question was fairly narrow to you, and I realize that you probably have a much broader view of this subject. So why don't you follow on what?
There are 2 points I'd like to bring up. One has to do with thinking inside or outside of the box. There is a box, but very often we approach problems not understanding what the box is. We think we're limited by boundaries which are not there. So part of the issue is don't think that there is no box because we must obey nature's laws. But don't imagine you're constrained by a box smaller than it really is. The box may be larger than common wisdom tells you. Eventually, there will be a box, but let's make sure that we work toward the walls of the real constraining box and not just stop here because we think there's a wall here. But the second point, which is a little different, our water troubles, aside from droughts and things, are because mankind has done a miserable job of managing the water resources that we have. We overdraw it, we waste it, we pollute it, we insult our water resources in so many ways. We have wars, and then we turn to technology to solve the problem. The problem is with mankind's behavior. We shouldn't think that nature is going to forget about enforcing her natural laws just because mankind has done a bad job of dealing with water. We've got to fix our own ways as a species and not say, oh, we can do anything we want because technology will bail us out.
Yeah. Miriam, did you follow?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to comment and say that even here in these first few days that I've spent, a number of times we have been talking about that we're doing a poor job in informing the media who inform the public about the technology, at least that we know of, that maybe is not the best yet, but we certainly are trying to make it the best, and there is a lot that is working and that it's beneficial, but we have not really informed the media who inform the public. And I think this is also one of the jobs that we still have to do.
It's a daunting job. I mean, whenever I certainly agree with you and with the concept, and then I think, look how difficult it is to get people to wear their seatbelts or to quit smoking when they know it kills them.
Yeah.
How are we going to get them to do those things that they must do to protect our water?
Yeah.
So it's a tough job, but it's one we've got to all work towards. We've just got a couple minutes left, and I wonder if I just go through each one of you and just ask if you have a final closing thought about the future or anybody we haven't mentioned that we should remember, or just any closing comment that you have, and just in the couple minutes we have left. Miriam, anything, or?
Well,
have we said it all?
I
guess we haven't even started.
No, we haven't even started, that's right.
Yeah.
But I think this is a wonderful opportunity, at least to record and to continue to record this history and the ideas and even some of the little vignettes that we were talking about before that maybe aren't important enough to put into this session. But
no, I agree, and I should also take the time to recognize Faith Leitner and her helping to fund this in honor of Gordon.
Yes. In fact, I remember Gordon, I worked with him closely in the 80s because I was trying to build the first seawater RO plant in Saudi Arabia. Just he was built the first one in Florida, or USA, in fact. Anyway, but certainly I think maybe I should focus on the future again, encouraging young generation to communicate, cooperate, and innovate. Not just learn what is today. Let us think together also. No single idea will come from a single person. No, the best idea will not come from a single person.
Collaborate.
So,
collaborate.
Exactly. Better than cooperate. Collaborate and communicate, because more innovations will come with communication and collaboration. So I hope this line will be more useful in the future.
we would be very happy to have this input, which we can output immediately.
Yes.
And I think really we should think about it and do it and cooperate together in order to put in this information. Even it doesn't have to be all at once, because it can be incremental. Yes.
Good. Jim, any?
People are always talking about the next big thing in desalination. there's always a possibility there will not be a next big thing. It'll just be some continued improvements. And that probably will be the case for a number of years. But if and when the next big thing comes along, it will bear strikingly little resemblance to what we know today. It will draw upon science and technologies which are well outside our comfort zone. It may involve a membrane, but the membrane will be only in a supporting role, not in a key separation role. It will, of course, always involve materials and things like that. But it will draw on very, very different science and technology from what we're used to. So we should be inviting papers which are not just, oh, let's do something else with the membrane in this thing and maybe we can make it a little bit better. We should be looking for papers that really make us reach to understand. I don't know how to articulate it any more than that.
I think you've done as good as can be said, and with that, I think we have to close this session. I want to thank you on behalf of the IDA for attending and for participating. It's been very interesting, and I hope that we have more of these sessions with more desalting veterans and build on what we've done here. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Faith.